Welcome to the AfterWord.
From the Loft.
Okay. This is a podcast that we do because we want to further explore the passage that was just preached. Usually, in preparing a sermon, the preacher has done quite a bit of study and thought, and only a portion of that makes it into the sermon. And so there's just more things to explore. So that's part of the reason for this podcast. Another reason, though, is we want to see God's glory in the text. What does the text show us that God is actually like? Because every text does to some extent. So we want to make sure we do that too. But as we get into it today, I want to tell you who I'm joined by first. I'm joined by Betty. Betty, welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay. And I'm joined by Brock Hornung, one of our elders.
Yo.
Yep. He preached the passage today. Vince is on vacation. Kirsten could not make it. So it'll be us three today. Okay. To get at it, here is the intro question provided for us by Betty. I'm not taking credit for this one. If you started a YouTube channel, what sort of content would you have on that channel?
Well, little fact about me. When I was younger, I used to really want to be a YouTuber because I was really into YouTubers and I'd spend a lot of time on YouTube. But I feel like that dream has been revived recently. And I'm sure the way that would look is different now than it would have been when I was a kid. And I do have a YouTube channel that has like really random videos on it. There's like 2 videos, but
you made the videos or other people's videos?
No, I made them.
Wow. How long ago?
One of them was in they're college. They're all from college except for like one that was for like an application. But I would probably, I want to like make vlogs and just like make like funny vlogs, just kind of my life. I'm going to Glacier this week and I bought a camera for the specific purpose of making a Glacier vlog. And then I'm going to continue that maybe on other future adventures and
Check
things.
this out. We're being chased by a grizzly bear.
Yeah. Just hold up the camera.
So a vlog, you're going to have to help me here. I'm getting old. It's VLOG. Mm-hmm. Is it a video form of a blog?
Pretty much. Yeah.
So you just kind of, it's like a video diary of sorts. Maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Sure. I'd also make music videos just for fun. I like to do that with my friends. This is really just exposing myself. And also just like funny sketches or things. But I feel like that's like kind of my creative outlet. I've always said that I'm not creative, but I've recently had a friend, shout out Jonathan, call me out for saying that I'm not creative, but I feel like this is my creative outlet and I just don't utilize it.
I'm learning about you right now. When I was young, there were no young people thinking about YouTubers because it was probably 20 years away yet. Man, Brock, what about you? You're closer to my age.
I also have an old YouTube channel that's floating out in the ether out there. I don't even remember the password, how to get into it, the email I had.
You know what it's called?
Okay. It's called Homemade Movies Productions.
I like that.
Yeah. I made videos back in high school and college, badly edited, quote unquote funny videos that I put online and, back before there was any money to be made in YouTube. So if anyone wants to try to find those videos, you can and send them to me because I'm sure I could find it if I took enough time. Don't judge me for what you see if you do find it.
So if you started doing the channel again, would you do something similar or would it be different?
I don't know. I'd be one of those GoPro fishing guys and go fishing and film myself with a GoPro on my chest. That's what I'd do.
Huh.
That sounds great.
Huh. If I started a YouTube channel, I have no idea what I would put on there.
You could do like paddleboarding GoPro videos.
Could you like the Town Church podcast?
Yeah.
Just like the video form of it?
Yeah. We can start recording it. I'll bring a camera next time.
Yeah, sorry. I don't have a great answer for that one. You could just video me hammocking, I guess. It'd be fun to watch,
just the activities that you like to do. You could just record yourself doing them or record them from your POV. Like get the GoPro strapped to your forehead and then just do things.
Our world is so weird. The stuff that we put on YouTube and watch. I'm going to transition though. Brock, could you give us a recap of the passage? 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 22.
Yeah, this is a passage. Paul is continuing his conversation around idolatry. Originally, it was food sacrificed to idols, and now I think he's getting into more of the dangers of true idolatry that Christians can fall into. And so he takes us to Old Testament Israel and reminds us of a number of stories where the people fell into idolatry or sexual immorality or complaining, which he connects all to idolatry. And he shows just the destruction that can cause. So I had 3 points, essentially, that the ways to flee idolatry, which I think is the climax of the passage today, is to have a proper view of who God is, have a proper view of what sin is, and have a proper view of what God does. The end.
And we're going to talk about all those things more here. Thanks for preaching, Brock. And like I said earlier, I know that often with preparing a sermon, there's a lot more than what actually makes it into the sermon. And so before I ask any questions, is there anything from your study that you think would be great to share that maybe didn't make it into the sermon?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot that didn't make it in. And that's, unlike Vince, who has a week to put together a sermon, I get like 2 months. So that's 2 months to study a passage.
A lot of content.
A lot of stuff to cut. I would, this is such a interconnected passage. There are so many reference points throughout the Bible that you can tie into just Paul's 22 verses here. And I brought up Deuteronomy 32, the Song of Moses, but I left out Psalm 78 or Psalm 106. Those are 2 passages that I would say almost certainly Paul was drawing from. So I'd encourage everyone to go read Psalm 78, Psalm 106, and read Deuteronomy 32 in full. I think Deuteronomy 32 is, I would say, maybe one of the most important passages in the Old Testament. There is so much connection and theology, and just the New Testament references it multiple times. There's a lot in that passage. It's extremely deep. So I would just encourage you, if you're a Bible reader, if you're a Bible studier, that Deuteronomy 32 should be one that you dive into more.
And as a reminder, that was the Song of Moses, correct?
Yes. There's actually a couple songs of Moses, but that's the Song of Moses at the end of his life, right before he dies.
Okay. It is really, really fascinating to me. In fact, it really encourages me that the Bible has a divine author because of things like that. The connections everywhere that span to thousands of years through different cultures and different authors, it's all saying the same thing in its own way. It's really, really encouraging. So I want to start with just a really broad question. How did this passage strike you? How did it hit you?
I feel like in many ways, but especially through the 3 points that you were going through, Brock, just as I reflect on my own life, like how much an improper view of God and of sin and of how God works just in our lives, like has really impacted the ways that I view other things and am prone to idolatry, as we all are in different ways. But I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of bigger picture things, like just like how much like we need to have a correct view of who God is and like how that shapes and informs everything. That's it.
That was good. I wanted you to keep going. Brock, in your study, how did it impact your own heart, this passage?
I mentioned it in the sermon, but I think it showed me the pervasiveness of idolatry and just showed how idolatry is not just simply worshiping a statue. It is so deeply intertwined in all of sin.
Yeah, for me, listening to your sermon this morning, we're recording this on a Sunday this week. I think I was primarily impressed by how good God is, that he calls us and warns us against something, right? Idolatry that is just a lesser, not even just lesser good, it's destructive. And so he offers us something that's completely the opposite. That's life and is himself. And so the offer is like, know me more. And that's where life and true pleasure is, and true happiness and true enjoyment is. And so in that prayer confession that you wrote today, if I remember right, there's something about praying that God help us to have an undivided heart or undivided life. And that's what he offers us, is such a good God. And so every time I sin and turn away from that, I'm starting to feel less like I'm just not doing the right things. And I think this passage and sermon helped me to feel more like in my sin and I'm also missing out on the deeper, more beautiful things I'm turning away from when I turn to idols. I'm still thinking about it since I just heard the sermon a little while ago, but really helpful. So let me ask this question. So how has in your own life, or maybe in the lives of others around you, how has concretely an improper view of God or an improper view of sin played out as you or others have chased idolatry? Help me make those connections. How have you seen an improper view of God or sin lead then to idolatry?
Well, an improper view of God, I mentioned it briefly, but when you don't have a proper view of who God is, I took low-hanging fruit and mentioned the LDS Church and Jehovah's Witnesses. But I think having an improper view of who God is, them demoting Jesus out of full deity, that has such a ripple effect in everything they believe. But ultimately, it's the works-based salvation. So basically, a bad theology leads to bad theology. That was really profound. Sorry.
Yeah, I think, well, when I reflect on really all of the years I was in school, but especially like middle school, high school, before I was really pursuing a relationship with the Lord, I didn't have, like, my understanding of sin in my own life was so skewed. I think I was very much like, I don't really sin. Like, I am pretty like competent and able on my own, and was really like enslaved to school and just success. And I really idolized school and doing well. And I think so much of that was rooted and like found purpose in that because I just didn't understand really who God was, really how he works in our lives and what he has done for us. Really the fact that I sin and am in deep need of a savior. And this isn't super specific, but I think I just see elements generally of how all of these points really fed into like life before, when I like would say I knew who God was and say I was a Christian, but then wasn't really living that out. And I think also going into college, when a lot of things changed for me, I think there was still an improper view of God, and just that maybe some different things like that I needed the approval of others, and like my fight for approval that maybe presented itself through school before, but has now presented itself in maybe deeper ways now, has come with, oh, because God doesn't really love me, or my view of God is just skewed in a lot of ways. So I don't know if that really answered the question correctly, which is how I feel most times I answer questions here. But yeah, I've just seen like how these are all woven in together to different seasons of my life, and it's maybe harder to be specific, but
so an improper view of God's love for you and acceptance for you then led to you living in such a way to try to earn either acceptance or love. My own words, but I think it's what I'm hearing you say.
Nope, that was a great summary.
But it is. It's a clear connection, isn't it?
Yeah.
I can think about that in my own life as well. That either, I mean, the big thing that's coming to mind over and over again, I think, is not realizing just how good and enjoyable God is. I think for a lot of my life, this is probably really normal as we grow up and mature. A lot of my life was, yep, God is good. Jesus did some great things for me. He's got my back. Like I'm set for eternity kind of thing. But that is miles away from, he's a person who deeply loves me. I get to interact with him today, and that is better than any other idol I could possibly chase. Now, I sin all the time. I chase idols all the time, but my view of God is starting to deepen a little bit. And it's so different. As you were talking, Brock, in the sermon, as you're preaching, I think this perspective is so good that you use verses 1-5 essentially to bring out that point that a way to flee idolatry is to see more of who God actually is. And you talked about how Jesus was present in the Old Testament. He's our rock, and Jesus is God. Like, this is who our God is. I've been thinking about that over the last couple of months in a little bit of a different, more of a formation angle, but it's the same thing. If I'm wrestling with sin, what I think I'm realizing as I get older is that the most effective way for me to flee from that sin, so flee from idolatry in Paul's words here, is less to focus upon my sin and all the strategies to try to not sin, and is more focusing upon the goodness of my God, which is super profound for me. Not to say we shouldn't talk about our sin, not to say we shouldn't strategize against it. I'm not saying that, But what I am saying is if we only focus upon the sin that we want to try to rid our lives of, I think we're missing the key ingredient, so to speak, which is what then are we turning to and what is pulling us from our sin? Well, it's the goodness of our God, is how enjoyable he is, and all that he is that we'll be learning for the rest of eternity, the depths of who he is, I think is way more effective. That's
good. I feel like over the last weeks, that's something that's just struck me, is how informed we are by just our view of God and how we're looking at him. And I think this is, it's not really related, but so I'll keep it brief. Like, I've just been thinking a lot about like big decisions in life, and then seeking God for answers or seeking God for X, Y, and Z. And then there's this one day that I was reading in Proverbs, and there's this shift in my heart of, I just want to be seeking God because he's God. And then I think since then, the way I've been approaching a lot of these things, not that it's been easier, but I just feel like that's reshaped a lot of it and how my heart has felt in it, and just so profound, like how knowing who God is just so deeply does shape us in so many different ways. So that was kind of related. You just made me think of that.
Yeah, that's so good. And so to your point, Brock, that's how Paul starts this passage on fleeing idolatry, and then moves into verses roughly 6 through 13-ish on what sin actually is. So that is to say, we don't ignore sin clearly, but have a better understanding of what sin is. Brock, could you just quickly summarize maybe what Paul is saying here that sin is, especially as opposed to what maybe we sometimes view it as?
Yeah, well, I think in this passage, he's specifically focusing in on the sin of idolatry, and how that is basically putting your trust in anything above God, or seeking something out of any created thing that only God can provide. And that plays itself out in other ways, like sexual immorality or complaining. And all of that is a form of idolatry. It's a form of false worship, and it leads to destruction. It leads to, poison, essentially, is what Moses says. It takes so much from you than what you think it's actually costing you.
So one of the examples that you gave, which Paul gives, which is really helpful, is the sin of complaining. That is one of those ones that we can get pretty familiar with, pretty comfortable with, indulge with others. It can characterize our lives to a large extent. But here, put in the context of no, it's actually sin, and what sin does, and it is sin, it always leads to destruction, is really, really sobering. Help me think about this a little bit, because this is where I was wrestling as I was thinking through this some more. Complaining is probably something that we're all really, really used to, either to do or to hear from others, or to do both. Help me think. If I'm in a relationship with somebody and there is something legitimately hard in my life, there's one good way that we can interact and share what that hard thing is, and be there for each other and listen really, really well. It seems like there's some health in that. But what we don't want to do, and to your point, Brock, is enable or indulge or allow to fall into this ditch where now we're just grumbling and complaining, and now it's turned actually into sin. Help me think through this. How do we navigate this well, where we can relate well to each other, but without falling into this ditch of sin of complaining?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it was something I wanted to flesh out more in my sermon, but I didn't really get to it. But it's a heart issue. And I think we see that if we go back to these verses, Numbers 14 and Numbers 21, where the people are complaining against God. It's one thing to have tough situations. It's hot out here. We're hungry. That's just a fact. But when it becomes we should go back to Egypt, that is now a direct accusation against God that he did something wrong. And so where it becomes sin, it's not just talking about the tough situation, because the point of this passage is not to say, don't, suck it up. Don't even tell people about your problems. No, it's where's your heart? And I think there's a fine line there. I think a lot of us are walking a fine line between complaining and just a statement of facts. And I should actually pull back. I actually think complaining is extremely pervasive, even in our church. I think it's a secret sin that's that's in front of all of us that we don't see because we're so numb to it. I think it's more subtle and maybe dark than you could say sexual immorality, which is also very pervasive, but complaining is like, it's not a secret sin in the darkness. It's a sin in the light that we don't even see because we're so numb to it. So I think there's, for us in the town church in Fort Collins, USA, that is something that is running rampant in all of our hearts that we probably don't even see.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to talk just as I'm processing on the spot. So this might be bad. I need to cut this out. I'm thinking of the Psalms. It's like David complains a lot in some Psalms. He says, this is exactly how I'm feeling. These people have all wronged me. I can't believe it, kind of thing. God, would you do something? So help me think about that. What is he not doing there then that if he was doing, we would say, no, that's actually sinful, David. You shouldn't write that. You shouldn't be saying those things.
I mean, this is probably also more of a heart thing that I don't know, like maybe like what that would look like if David were writing that. But I think the big heart piece that's like stating things how they are versus like complaining where it falls into sin is, are we also saying these things because we want people to feel bad for us, or we're trying to like just say, woe is me, look how horrible my life is, and like bring in pity from other people, or say God has wronged us for those things or whatever it may be, or just like this is how it is. And I feel like that's how I read it with the Psalms, like is as David's writing these things, it's like this is how it is, and it's hard, but it's not out of like I want everyone who reads these Psalms to pity me and like see how hard my life is, but to see God's goodness in that too. But I don't know if that like would tie into your specific question, but that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, motives are definitely a question in it.
Yeah, I think it's what is the result of that? What is coming out of your heart? And it can come out in different ways, because if your boss at work is a jerk and difficult, that could be a fact. But are you driving home and having road rage and flipping off drivers and, speeding and screaming? Or is that what's coming out of your heart as a result of that? Or are you turning to God for help? Are you turning to others for help and asking for prayer? I mean, it could be like, I am on the edge here. I'm about to, throw this food against the table or whatever, but it's what's coming out of your heart and as a result of the trial you could say you're going through.
Okay, so do you think it'd be fair to say that how David, for example, handled the difficulties in his life in some of those Psalms in kind of a complaining sort of way is actually the way to handle it, because he's going to God, right? This is a prayer. Mm-hmm. This is how I'm feeling. He doesn't have to hide anything, which seems like that's vastly different than me just stewing in my car or throwing something, and I've done these things, or just throw something across the room or unload on somebody else in more just an angry, like I just want you to commiserate with me sort of way, rather than taking it to our God. Still being fully honest, but taking it to him and expecting him or asking him to help.
There's something in what you said, Brock, that I don't know, just felt so convicting to me. And when I think of complaining in my own life, it's usually over like pretty mundane things or just silly things. But that all of these things are things that we can bring to God in prayer and bring to others, like for them to help pray for us. And you were just talking about like, oh, are we bringing this to others to pray for us? And it's like most things that I complain about, no, because I'm just like, I want people to feel bad for me in this, or it's like such a silly thing that I'm like, I don't need prayer, but it goes so much deeper and invades our hearts in ways that we really fail to see a lot of the time.
So we've got a proper view of God helps us to flee from idolatry, a proper view of what sin actually is, which always leads to destruction, no matter how much of a white lie, so to speak, we think it is, or some of the big ones, right? That always leads to destruction, no matter what. And understanding both those things can help us flee from idolatry. And then the last point was seeing what God does for us. Talk about that real briefly, Brock, and where Paul lands on what God does for us in fleeing idolatry.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a two-sided coin between the first and third point. But who God is, having a proper view of that is how it affects how we flee from idolatry or turn to him. Because if we're viewing God, let's just say, for example, we only view God as wrathful. That is an aspect of God that's important, but we miss the grace. Well, then it feels hopeless to flee from idolatry. Or if we, on the flip side of that, if we only view God as full of grace without a wrath towards sin, then we're going to be indifferent to our sin because it doesn't really matter. Like, we're good. God covered us, so let's just go ahead and sin.
So is how God acts in accordance or not in response. It's probably maybe not the best word, but I'm going to use that word. How God reacts in response to sin, both in a saving sort of way for us as well as his justifiable wrath upon it, can help us to flee from idolatry. And idolatry is sin. Like every sin at some point is idolatry, right? Okay, so help me with this. Let's try to get really, really practical here. Having a proper view of God can help, having a proper view of sin can help, and having a proper view of what God does in response to sin can all help us to flee from idolatry. But when I'm actually in the trial, when I'm actually under temptation, I'm often not thinking clearly like this. Like, oh yeah, what are those 3 points? Okay, let me kind of rehearse those things. Do you have either of you have any thoughts around some really practical ways to incorporate more of this to help us when we're in trial and temptation?
I mean, I brought up this verse, Colossians 3, which says, set your mind on the things above. And then I also brought up 1 Peter 2, which said, it is a gracious thing, I might butcher this, but it's a gracious thing that when one's mind is on God, you endure the trial of suffering unjustly. And so in the midst of that trial, there's this call to put our minds on, to set our minds on God, to set our mind on the things above in those moments. And this is kind of a simple cliche answer, but I just think things like prayer and Bible reading and Christian community are just low-hanging fruit that God is giving us. And so it doesn't have to be like some super complicated answer. It's right there for us. Sometimes that seems hard to do, but just take that step into prayer, into reading God's word, and just see what the Holy Spirit might be doing in you through those actions.
It does seem to me that there's some aspect of timing as well. I remember, man, when we had an earlier sermon series, we were talking about grief quite a bit on the podcast, and something that Vince and Kirsten brought up often was that once you're in the middle of grief, in some sense, it's too late to do some things that you probably should have done beforehand, like building some good community around you, building some good habits around you and relationship with God and that sort of thing, where it's much harder to try to do that once the grief has already hit. And it seems like something like that might be relevant here too. Like once I'm in the trial, once I'm in the temptation, whatever reactions come out of me, because that's often what it feels like, it's just reactive, it's coming out of what's already inside my heart, what's already inside my soul. It's just coming out. I don't sit and think logically now, should I respond this way or should I respond that way? And here's all the different consequences of each. It just comes out, which means, at least what that informs for me, is that the work for me to do before that trial or temptation is before that trial or temptation. Like, am I growing in my knowledge of who God is before that trial and temptation come? Do I have some sort of good rhythm of interacting with God and people around me before that temptation comes, so that what's inside of me starts to change? So once I'm in that pressure cooker, hopefully what then just comes out starts to change by God's grace slowly over time as well. So a matter of timing, I think, could be helpful in some of those ways that we get to see more of God, who God is and what sin is. Yeah, like you said, Brock, Bible reading, prayer, community, things that we really probably talk about every week here on this podcast, but there's a reason for that. I want to ask a little bit of a different question. Brock, I was a little bit surprised. That might be the wrong word. Toward the end of this passage, Paul brings the conversation back to food and to idols. And he says this in verse 20. He says, "No, I imply that what pagans sacrifice they offer to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be participants with demons." You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Shall we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? So he makes a clear prohibition here that I do not want you to participate with demons, which looks like it's food offered to idols. Yet a chapter or two before, he left that question open more. Like, you are a Christian. Idols are nothing. The food's nothing. Feel free to partake, but do be mindful of others who may be watching you. This feels like a different response to that same issue. Help me understand that.
Yeah, it is challenging, and I kind of struggled with it too, because next week when you preach, he's going to kind of go back and say, who cares? Like, it's not real. I'll give an example that I thought of that I think kind of hits on what Paul is getting at here. And someone else posed this question to me kind of jokingly, but I think it helps. So someone asked, is it okay for us as Christians to eat at Torchy's Tacos because their mascot and logo is a little devil demon boy? So is it okay for us to walk into a restaurant that's logo is a demon and eat amazing, delicious tacos if you haven't been there? And I guess I'm giving it away that I have eaten there and I like it a lot. Mm-hmm. But it would be like if Christians were getting an uproar, if everyone's getting an uproar and getting mad at you for going to Torchy's Tacos because there's a little demon logo, but on the same hand, they're engaging in sexual immorality and complaining, which is so much worse for you. Eating a taco does not ruin your soul. But true idolatry, which is complaining and sexual immorality, as just the two examples he gives in this passage, there is an extremely heavy cost for that, a destructive cost, where eating at Torchy's, might not look great, but the cost on your soul compared to sexual immorality and complaining is so different. So I think that's kind of another example I thought of, and maybe this is silly, but back in the day, Christians used to really rail against Harry Potter. Maybe they still do, but it just seems like that's a dead argument. And if you don't want to read or watch Harry Potter, that's great if that's your conviction. But I'm just saying, like, Christians would make such a big deal about the witchcraft in Harry Potter, but then they turn around and watch rated R movies with, very inappropriate scenes. And no one was saying anything about that. Everyone was harking on a kid's movie and a kid's book, but everyone else is engaging in true things that are corrupting of the soul. And I think those are just kind of what Paul is doing here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, can you talk about it more? Help me make that final connection. What is Paul doing here that's differently than what he was doing in the previous chapters? It's a good question. Let me process that real quick. Off the cuff, I would say, let's just say if there's someone who is making a big deal about eating food offered to idols, but we know that an idol is nothing. You're not participating in anything. You're not going in and participating in the worship ceremony. You're just eating food that you bought in the market. It's not really a big deal compared to true idolatry, which is a lack of trust in God, which is complaining or sexual immorality. I don't know if I'm just saying the same thing again, but that's my stab at it. So are you saying that what Paul's talking about at toward the end of your passage here in verses, kind of 14 to the end, 14 through 22, is he's talking less about food that was offered to fake idols, and we know that God is over everything, there's only one God, that sort of thing. But what he's talking about here in chapter 10 is actually being an idolater, like actually engaging in these things that we as Christians know are nothing, but still actually being like an idolater in the middle of all of it.
Yeah, so I think if you just go to the golden calf incident, you see all three. They complained against God. They built a golden idol. They sacrificed and ate food in honor of it, and then they engaged in sexual immorality. So all of that stuff is essentially a part of the worship ceremony of this golden calf, of this false god. It's participation with demons. It is full-on worship, every part of it. While if you're just buying meat in the market and eating it, and you don't even know you don't even know who it's for or what, you're not participating in the worship of that deity. But if you're actually sitting there engaging in this dark stuff, then that's a whole different animal.
Okay, so I think I'm starting to understand a little bit more. So like in verse 19, what do I imply then? The food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? And the implied answer is no, but then he says, but I don't want you to participate with demons. And so it's a little bit broader than, is that what you're saying? Like any time that I idolize anything, in a way I am participating with demons, as those pagans do when they sacrifice food to idols. Am I getting there or not really? Like, is it almost like an object lesson or an illustration of what idolatry does in general?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're getting there, and I think that's what I'm trying to say is just, I mean, ultimately any idolatry or sexual immorality or complaining, which is all interconnected, is a lack of trust in the one true God, is seeking your own pleasure on something outside of the one true God. And therefore it is a worship ceremony due to these false gods, these wicked gods, these demons.
But it's heavy because misplaced worship, idolatry in a lot of ways. This passage is really sobering, and you preached that way. You preached as a very sobering sort of passage. There is a little hint of light, and there's a lot of hints of light, but one that a question I wanted to ask, this is toward the end of the passage as well. Nope, it's not. It's right in the middle. This is in verse 13. This is what Paul writes. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. I want to talk about this way of escape just a little bit. What are some just really practical, concrete ways that either you have seen God provide as ways of escape from trial or temptation, or that God could do? Like, what sort of things are we looking for here when we're looking for a way of escape?
You know, I think when we're going through a trial, being alone makes it very hard because there's just that much more temptation. No one's there watching your back. And so I think having good Christian community, people praying for you, people reaching out to you, people you can reach out to, people you can ask for help from, that is God's grace as a way of escape, to escape the temptation towards idolatry, to keep your eyes focused on God when you have community around you who is loving you, lovingly encouraging and pressing you to keep your eyes on God.
Yeah, that's where my mind was going to. Like, there's a lot that comes from community, and you also really leaning into that. Like, it's one thing to have those people, but if you're not willing to share what is on your heart and confess sin to others and really ask for that accountability, that often cannot be as helpful. And so I think having that community and pressing in really well to it and really asking people to walk with you. Like, I've seen that for myself, like in different seasons where there's maybe been something that I've struggled with a lot more, like being honest with friends has, one, just felt so freeing, but two, has provided a lot of accountability that I would have not had on my own. So kind of just echoing what Brock just said, but that was a big thing that came to mind for me as well.
So for those who are listening who are currently undergoing some significant trial, I guess it doesn't have to be significant, just trial or temptation, then one encouragement for maybe a step forward is to lean on those other Christian brothers and sisters that they have to help in this time. And that could be a way that God is providing as a way of escape to endure the trial or temptation without sinning as a result of the trial or temptation.
This is kind of different and maybe not what you're looking at, asking for, but another thing that just comes to mind is just a simple, heartfelt calling out to the name of Jesus in the midst of the turmoil and the trial. I just feel like there's been multiple times in my life where I feel so overwhelmed and just filled with temptation and anger or whatever it is, and just like crying out to Jesus for help. It's like it just calms the storm, you know, like with what he did on the seas. It just like brings this breath of fresh air. So that's like a super practical way. I just think I've seen that in my own life a few times.
So fleeing temptation, fleeing idolatry here is not only possible, but Paul promises is possible in every particular instance because of the grace of God and the work of his Spirit in the middle of it. which means we're never allowed to say, well, God is forcing me to sin in the middle of this temptation or trial, or that he's just put me in an impossible position. We can say biblically that's never the case. It may be hard to see the way out. It definitely could be difficult, but there's still that hope or that optimism, that truth that God is still present. He's still working in the midst of it, and he will help you to endure it in a way that doesn't fall into your own destruction. Yeah. All right, before I ask my last question, let me ask this one. Let's just give a really practical example that at least some of us can probably relate to, and how these things might work out, like in real life today, Fort Collins, Colorado.
So one thing that came to my mind as I was studying this passage and just seeing the connection between complaining and idolatry. One thing I was thinking through as a parent of 3 daughters now, little kids whine and complain a lot. And I think sometimes as parents, we're really quick to, discipline for certain sins, like, maybe lying or hitting. But a lot of times we are lax when it comes to whining and complaining, which is very pervasive. If anyone has little kids here, they know that they whine and complain all the time. And because we whine and complain all the time in our own way, we let it go because we're numb to it. And so even though it's super annoying and frustrating, we let our kids get away with idolatry, essentially, because we've kind of hardened our hearts to it ourselves. So I think that was something that was helpful for me as I think through raising my family, raising our kids, and just seeing the need to help my kids work through this whining and complaining, because it's a pervasive dark sin, just like sexual immorality, right? But we're so numb to it today, and it just all that to say, it gave me a fresh perspective for when I raise my kids, and not letting them just freely whine and complain, because that's going to lead to darkness down the road as they get older and older.
And so what I hear you saying is that allowing that to continue to be a big piece of their life shapes their hearts and lets them practice it in a sense, without curbing it or maybe shaping their hearts in a different way. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Let me ask our last question of this. In this passage, what is God like according to these words of Paul?
I feel like this is an indirect answer that this passage helped me form, but I think just what comes to mind to me is just that God is loving and generous and faithful and provides for his children and gives us everything that we could possibly need, that we are trying to find in idols. That was just like something that kept coming to mind over and over, of like, God is like fully sufficient. And we are so quick to run to other things when, if we have a better, more true and concrete view of who God is, like, we'll see just how fully, like, he is the one who provides everything we could possibly need and more, and we'll still sin. But I don't know. I think it's just like seeing how God fulfills like so many things that our hearts long for and try to find in other things.
I would say God is true. He is Father, Son, and Spirit. And anything outside of that biblical description of who God is a false god or an idol. And pursuing that will only lead to darkness.
Yeah, the last verse here is verse 22, and Paul says, "Shall we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he?" We have a jealous God, and his jealousy for us is for our good. And so if I pursue idols, he knows it'll lead to my destruction, so he's jealous for my love back, not just because it brings him glory, which it does, but it's also for my good. It's really striking to me how good our God is, even in his jealousy for us. Okay, next week, Betty, you got the passage?
Yes, the rest of chapter 10 and 11:1.
Okay, so 10 verse 23 through chapter 11 verse 1. Please read it, and we will see you then. Thanks for listening.
Farewell.
Peace.